Greetings. Welcome to the next episode of Alvin Talks. I'm your host, Alvin. In this episode, we'll be talking about social difficulties in general. Now, a lot of people may think social difficulties are like shyness or the inability to communicate. Well, for me, I consider them invisible difficulties, with physical difficulties being visible. Now, not all physical difficulties are visible. There are some that are invisible. For instance, blood conditions. A lot of blood conditions can be invisible, like diabetes. I myself have one called esophageal restrictions, which basically means that stuff gets stuck in my throat. Now I can still breathe, I can still talk, and you wouldn't be able to tell outside out visibly that I am having an episode, but eventually it has to either come up or go down, and you can pretty much guess which way I'd like it to go. And that brings my to my first point. I can People who are able to understand my physical difficulty much easier because of how I can explain it to people. But if I were to try to explain to people why I am anxious around one of my female coworkers, they would be confused a little bit. And that's the first big point about understanding the differences between the two. Now, also, therapies can be different for physical difficulties or social difficulties. For example, my mother, she just went through hip surgery and they gave her a start date and an end date for her therapy. And that was it. But for me and my social anxiety, there is no end date. I don't have a set structure for how to deal with it. And the therapy that I need, people may not fully understand or fully grasp what it entails. Now, one of the other big points that I have about social difficulties is that I find people are more willing to forgive someone with a physical difficulty than someone with a social difficulty. And here's an interesting example of why I say that. No one picks on someone who has a limp or uses a cane or a wheelchair. They'd be mercilessly butchered in front of people. The person who does the teasing. But someone who has a limitation on social situations, no one truly, people will mock them and not give them a chance to understand. They'll get frustrated with them a lot easier than the person with the physical limitations. So that's my major point, is that we need to be more open and understanding of social difficulties. And again, that's why I'm doing this. Now, I will be giving tips every episode. And this episode, my tip is just listen. And it sounds silly, but it's a very simple. And this works for both people who have social difficulties and those who have to interact with them. And here's why. A lot of people just want someone to talk to. They want to communicate. So being the listener helps that person open up to you. It also is good because sometimes the person with social difficulties, they just want to talk and they will eventually tell you what their problem is. But here's the real kicker. Sometimes you have to listen for what is not being said. I know that sounds like some weird Eastern philosophy, but it is a true thought when you think about it, because sometimes it's not what is being said that can be just as important as what is being said. And being a good listener also makes you a good friend. I had a coworker who I overheard his sister was in the hospital, and all I did was just later say, "Hey, I hope your sister's doing well." And he thanked me and appreciated that. That opened the door to communications. That opened it. So that's the first step towards getting over the social difficulty, is to open the lines of communication. And that means you have to be just as receptive to communication as they are to receiving your communication. Well, I think that wraps this episode up. I hope that we can continue this further and to my next episode. Thank you.